And so it is. Welcome to Hashketball Review. I'll be your host, Kyle Coverly, and we are reviewing Hashketball. Gordo was kind enough to donate some code for us to tear apart. So I just forked and cloned Gordo's repo, and I just ran RSpec, and I've got a whole bunch of passing tests. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through Gordo's solution, and we're going to try to find ways to make it better. This process is called refactoring. So refactoring is same behavior, different implementation. So it works now. We're not trying to change anything about that. We want to keep that the same while we make the code better. That's refactoring. So let's take a look at Gordo's code. All right, so we got a game hash here. There's your num points scored. Very nice work. Good job, Gordo. All right, so let's find some things to improve on this. We look at this first one. Let's see, there's that one. Num points scored. All right, so first one we're trying to do is num points scored. Before we get started on this, a little bit of editorializing. I fucking hate this method name. I don't know what it is about programmers that they feel like they need to make these little abbreviations for things. Why is it num points scored instead of number of points scored? It doesn't make it run any faster. It doesn't. The computer doesn't understand it better when you like talk in like beep boop syntax. All it does is make it slightly harder to read. This was you were given this. So this is me like shaking my fist at the person who wrote this this exercise. But I would prefer that in your programming career you use whole words. So much better. Once upon a time, like bytes were expensive, and it was like, I'd love to name that thing number of points scored, but I'm only allowed to make my function name 4 letters or something. It's not the case anymore. This is part of how you communicate. And what drives me especially nuts about this is you'll see people do something like, they'll write this like really descriptive comment here and then give it some garbage name. Just make the name of the thing good enough. Now you don't need the comment. All right. So end of editorial. So we're taking in a player name and we're trying to return the number of points that they scored. Hey, thank you, Santi. Yeah. So this is the hash that we're working with here. So we need to be able to get the player name. We're given like Alan Anderson, and we want something back like 22. So looks like Gordo did this quite a bit. I would imagine a lot of you did it this way. So someone talk me through Gordo's logic here.
I can.
Yeah, go for it.
So he has the method number of points scored, and it takes in a player's name. On the next line, he's going to iterate through each key value pair in the hash.
Good.
In the next line after that, he takes the key of players, and he's going to iterate through that. And then he has a binding prime, which we can kind of just ignore. And then he says, return the player's points if the player's name is equal to the name given.
Very nice. Thank you very much. And like, there's actually some like pretty cool, clever things in here, like including this like trailing if. That's like a Ruby specific thing. There's not a whole lot of languages that even have that. All right, so a couple things that we can do right off the bat is improve these names a little bit. So I mentioned about programmer abbreves. We got player N here. What could we change that to? Think to yourself for a second when calling someone. Tony, give me an improved name for this.
I'd just say player.
Sure, that works for me. Now, so here's the challenge with doing something like player. Player sounds like a kind of complex thing to me. Player sounds like all of this. So if I see player, I'm expecting I can do something like player shoe, player points, player steals. Especially since this thing is named players, I'm expecting a player to be all of those things together. So Tony, how can I narrow that down a little bit more?
Yeah, so I guess you can say player underscore points to be more specific.
Ooh, but I want the points out of it. What am I putting into it? Not the points.
Oh, okay. Player. Player name, yeah.
Player name. There we go.
Yeah.
And here's another thing I really like about that. That's what it's called up here too. There's an idea in programming called ubiquitous language, which is like, hey, if we call it a player name here, let's call it player name everywhere. And so that if it's ever something different than that, that's like a subtle nod to us that like, nope, it's not the same player name we were using up here. It's only the player's first name. It's only the player's last name. It's player's full name. So if I see player full name, I'm expecting that like it has their middle name or something also. All right, so we've changed that to player name. Another thing that I'd recommend, just from a Ruby style standpoint, so you can wrap this stuff in parentheses, and that's exactly how we do it in JavaScript. It's how we do it in Java. It's how we do it in Python. It's how we do it in like most languages. Ruby people generally leave those off. That also works, and this looks way more Ruby-ish. Okay, so now we're eaching through this game hash, and what are these two things? We're saying home and away, and then keys. Should I come up with better names for those?
Could you say
what you got, Naya?
Value?
Hmm?
Did you say like key and value?
So that's what they actually are. So this is going to be, well, I'm going to copy this so we can keep referring to it. So key and value is like what it literally is. So as I'm iterating through it, it's going to be, the first one's going to be key, and then it's going to be whatever all of this other stuff is. And then the second one, key is going to be away, and value is going to be this hash that it's assigned to. So my next word of caution when you're naming things is like, that's what they are in programmer land. What are they in the problem, though? So Naya, what can I do to make those more specific to the problem?
You can put away in hash, or yeah, I don't know what you'd say for home and away.
So this is what Gordo picked, is like home away, and those are the only two values that we're going to have for this. But what are those examples of in the problem?
Teams?
Do I get more specific?
Teams.
Location.
Naya.
What's an example of like the home and away?
Yeah, what are those examples of?
Teams.
Someone help Naya. What else could this be?
Cities.
Cities. But like if I see cities, I'm expecting like Denver, Seattle, New York, something like that.
Locations.
That's what I like. So now pluralization matters on this too, because it's going to be either home or away, and I'm going to be using it as a variable down here. So we drop that S off. What's the location? Home. What's the location? Away. Versus what's the locations? Home. What's locations? Away. So we want this to like, and this is like where like the engineering stuff has very little to do with math. Like what something is, the semantics of how it breaks down, that's a very liberal artsy kind of thing. They say there's only two hard things in all of programming, cache invalidation and naming things. And like, it's for fucking real. Like naming things is very, very difficult. And if you sweat the names hard and make sure that you have really good descriptive names, it makes it easier to solve the problems. My wife just came out and said, and the third one is off by 1 errors. So I said there were 2 things, there's 3 things there, whatever. All right, so
All joke.
I like location for this. Now, what are the examples of the value? Can I get a volunteer for that?
That's like everything about the team.
Yes. So we could use what word?
I don't know. I think I used attributes.
Okay. We don't have to get too clever with it. If it's everything about the team, we could say
Team info.
Or just team. There's nothing wrong with team.
No.
Because I'd mentioned like with player, the reason I was a little bit sketchy about passing in player when I'm really passing in the player name is that the player is this entire thing. The player name is just one part of that. If it's everything having to do with the team, that's a different ballgame. So I think team is totally appropriate for that. And right away, we can see how this is going to make this easier to read as we're trying to solve the puzzle here. So this was keys originally. Keys players, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. A team's players and eaching through those, that makes a lot more sense.
Shouldn't it be team?
Oh, thank you. So I go through each of a team's players and then take each player. Wow, that's like pros. All right, and then I take a player's points. All right, very nice. Another pro tip here. So we're not using location, are we? Location is a good name for this. But if you're not going to use it, a thing you'll see programmers do a lot, just make it an underscore. That's a hint to the next developer, like, I don't actually use this. Either way works. And then we change this to player name. Go ahead.
The requisite of having that placeholder there, what is the program using it for if it's not being used?
Is it that there's like you're looking at a hash, so there's like a key and a value?
Yes.
So you need to have both of them in the yeah.
You nailed it, Derek. So the it would be different if all I needed was the location. Then I can just leave that off. But if the thing that I need is the second thing, I got to have some kind of placeholder for it.
Okay.
Does putting that little underscore placeholder there undermine the readability that we were going for?
No, it actually increases it because I'm trying to minimize like the visual space something that doesn't matter takes up.
Okay.
It allows me to focus on the part that matters. Either way. All right, so none of this matters if we broke the code. So let's see if we broke the code. Run the test again. Still green. Another piece of commentary I'd have on this is this binding.pry that's commented out. Don't commit commented out code. Just get rid of it. All right. So this is like this is a mighty fine solution to this problem. I'd like to walk you through another. Another thing that you'll do a lot in programming is actually, I'll throw it out to you. What was the hard part, especially about that first one, where we get the player name and then we need to get something about them back?
Getting to the array, switching between a hash and array to try to get the values out accordingly.
Definitely. Switching between hashes and arrays. One other thing that was specifically tricky about this.
Everything.
I had trouble getting like down deep into it, like getting into the layers of it.
Yes.
Yeah, drilling down.
Yeah, like if the inside the player's array there was like, I don't know.
Yeah, if that,
I mean, I think it would be easier if it was like another hash with the player's name pointing to an array of all the stats or something.
Oh, amazing. This would be a lot easier if I had all the players together, right? But shoot, they didn't give me all the players together. That's kind of a bummer. So,
yeah. So,
but we're programmers, right? That's a solvable problem. So pause for a sec. What I want you to do is think about what code you could write. This isn't making a test pass. All this is doing is making this program easier to solve. So you can do this two different ways. If you want to just make an array of all the players, so we have 5 players here. We have 5 players here. If you want to make a single array of 10 players, that's fine. If you want to do that as a hash, where the keys are the player names and then the values for each of those are like the player info, that's fine. I want you to write out the code that you think would do that. I'm going to give you 4 minutes. What method could you write that would transform, take in a game hash, and return out either a player's array or a player's hash with all 10 players? Go. I want you to Slack it to me when you're done, by the way. Two minutes. 20 seconds.
Fuck.
I think that could be the Flatiron School fight song. Fuck. All right, send me whatever you got, even if it's not done. I just want to see what's on your mind. Cool, outstanding. Let's see this one. So a couple things. I saw a few of them where they're inside the method. So something like, something like num points scored, player name, and then we do like whatever our eventual logic is going to be. We're going to have some player and then return their points. And then we're going to look up a player by players by player name. And then some kind of like players is whatever in here. So that works. What's the downside of solving the problem like that?
You have to solve it again for the next one.
Yeah, it's not reusable.
Exactly. So we want to have something that like breaks that out. So maybe we make another separate method that's like get players. And now I can do something like get players and then give that the player name like that. Or if I'm doing it with parentheses, like that. Okay. Another thing that I saw is I saw a couple that were hard-coded. So we go, all right, I want something like game hash, home, players, 0, and then going through like each of those. And maybe you're shoveling that into like a players thing. Something like that. So what's the downside with an approach like that?
You have to hard code it. It's not dynamic.
It's not dynamic.
Yeah, what if there are 6 players?
Yeah. What if I got 20 people on this team? I got to change the code every time I add a person. So that's we'll call that a coding smell. Anytime you're doing something like that, that should be a hint that you're probably going down the wrong path. The whole point of writing these programs is that as the problem grows and gets bigger, our solution to it doesn't have to. Like you're making the computer do the hard work of just crunching harder as it gets more data rather than your fingers and your brain doing the work. Another thing unrelated to solving the problem, when you're sending code in Slack, some of you figured out that you can make something look like code. Like this doesn't look like code, but this does. You can wrap it in backticks like that. If you're sending like a bunch of code, like one of these methods, don't do that. That makes it look all funky. What you want to do instead is wrap that in what are called code fences. It's 3 ticks on either side, and it looks wildly better when you're sending somebody code. Anybody know why you want to format it like code at all? Why not just send it plain?
I
This is a
mean,
design question.
readability, right?
Yeah, why?
The indentations line up where they're supposed to.
The indentation lines up where it's supposed to. Why? How come in this code here, if I go to line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, line 10 there, or column 10 there, column 10 there, it's all the same. Why is that?
The spacing of each character is the same. Isn't that
Yes.
kerning or something, right?
So the typeface that you use for code it's called monospaced. Every character takes up the exact same amount of space. That's not the case with normal like long form text that we read. L's are really small, capital M's are really big. And so for long form text, way more readable. With code though, we need things to line up in a particular way. So we use monospace fonts. And in things like Slack, you want to send someone code, using those backticks or the code fences will monospace your code. And now you know. All right, so of all of the things that I saw though, I really liked Haley's. Haley, can you walk me through how you did this?
Yeah, so I created the method name and I realized that I didn't put a parameter on it after I sent it to you. So
Okay.
it would need a parameter, which I just put hash. I then used game hash dot map do, and then I left the first parameter blank, and then I used team as my second parameter. And then I did team and then the player's key.
Not bloody bad. So actually, I'm going to say we probably still don't need a player. I just want something that's going to give me a list of players.
Would it be the hash that we're putting into it, or the array that we're putting into it?
We can make a separate method for that if we want.
Okay.
All right, let's see what this get players does. I like this. So if I wanted to play around with this a little bit, what am I going to do?
Try it.
Try it. So I want to put it here. So like when this num points scored method gets called, while I'm in that, I'm prying. All right, so I'm in the pry. And then what do I call that? Get players. Let's see what comes back from that. Oh, interesting. Take a look at the very top left corner. What do you see there? After the arrow.
An array inside an array.
An array inside of an array.
Filled with hashes.
And then right before Jeff Adrian, I see an array close and another array start.
Mm-hmm.
Bummer. Well, I don't want to let that stop us. Can anybody think of a way that we can still use this approach, but not have the array with two arrays in it?
Can, instead of dot map, can you dot reduce it? So you're coming back with one.
Ooh, that would be a totally appropriate use of reduce. I think we still have an easier way though.
Could split the home and away teams? Bring them together as two separate arrays and then concat?
Totally, concat would absolutely do this. Haley, what you got?
Instead of using team and then players, just use game hash and then players. I don't know if that would work.
I don't think it would.
Okay.
Because players isn't part of game hash.
Oh.
So whenever we have like arrays within arrays like this, let's go over to the docs. Ruby array. So these methods, these are all the different things that we can do on an array. Huh, flatten, you say. Returns a new array that is a one-dimensional flattening. So let's take a look at the example here. Hey, an array inside of an array. All right. And if we flatten it, jams it all together. All right. So what if I said something like nested array for that, and then I return nested array dot flatten. Let's see what that does. Get players. Hey! Now I just have an array of hashes.
Yes.
That's exactly what I wanted. Now we talked very briefly yesterday about chaining. Can anybody think about how I could chain this?
As in, I think I forgot what chaining means.
Right now I'm doing this in 2 steps. I'm taking the result of this map and storing it in a variable, and I'm flattening the variable and returning it. How can I make that all one step?
Could we kill the variable and just end dot flatten?
End dot flatten, he says. Kill the variable, he says. Let's see if that does it. Get players. Hey! Okay, cool. So now I have this array of hashes. That's pretty cool. That looks like some pro code too. And since we're only getting this one thing out of it, can anybody think of how I might make this even tighter?
Get rid of the do end with the curly braces.
Oh, what I'm thinking. So if we did something like that, and the general Ruby convention is if you're using the curly braces, it all goes on one line.
Right.
Now I made a little one-liner.
Yes.
Does it still work?
Is that a more or less readable, even though it's on one line?
Oh, bless you. All right, that still works. But did we hurt the readability there? Is that harder to read than that is? I'm kind of inclined to agree.
Yeah.
That reads
I've
a
always
little
been so
better.
resistant.
Yeah, that's starting to get a little bit noisy.
Yeah.
Cool. So then we leave it like that. All right, so now I can get the players. Back to our original problem though, where we wanted to like maybe pass in a player name to something and get that player and then just return their points. Okay, so I can get all the players. If I was going to come up with a name for like, all right, I take this list of players and I just get back a particular player hash by that person's name, I want you to Slack me what you think the name of that method should be.
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So right now, I can get a list of the players. What I want now is to get a particular player out of that. What should this be?
Are you gonna want just their name or like their whole profile?
I want their whole thing. I want to take in their name and get back the entire player. Tell me what I'm going to replace the underscores with. Slack it to me. So I'm seeing individual player, get player info, player data, player stats, get player stats, player info, player profile. These are all pretty good. So my thought process on this would be something like, what other things could I identify a player by? Because the name's not the only one. Guess what? Their numbers are unique too. I also might want to get a player by who has the most or the least of something. And so how I'm getting that player seems significant to me also. The ultimate thing that I'm getting out of it, we talked about this at the beginning, is a player. That's that entire hash. In our ubiquitous language, we're calling it a player here. If the plural of it is players, that's the array, then I'm trying to get a player. I'm trying to get the player by their name. So I think that's what I would call the method. So I would call this something like get player by name. Because I could also have a get player by points. I could have a get player by most that takes in maybe a player name and some attribute that I want to get the most of. Get player by name feels pretty good to me. So then, well, shoot, how do I implement that? Give me some ideas.
Yeah. Get players.each.
Okay, get players dot each.
Or player name, sorry, dot each. I'm just gonna mute myself real quick.
You're fine, you're fine. Like, we can't be afraid of making mistakes. We can't be afraid of like looking dumb in front of our buddies. This is the drinking the Kool-Aid thing. Like, we got to take some risks if we're going to learn something. Learning is all about risk. So every time, like, you take a risk of sounding wrong in front of other people, you make it a little bit safer for everybody else to do that. So that's a commendable thing. All right. So we've got get players.each. Ooh, but each, we've been learning about this in the enumerables lessons. That's our unexpressive enumerable. Do we have a more expressive one than each?
Select.
Select. So what's select do?
Select iterates over the data structure and returns a new data structure based on a criterion.
You are correct. So if I do something like that, and I'm returning, does the player name, is it the same as player name? Then I'm going to get back the things that match that. And like, that should work. So if Jeff Adrian was one of the ones we're looking for, if I do something like get player by name, Jeff Adrian, cool. I get back Jeff Adrian, asterisk. What did I really get back?
An array that has Jeff Adrian in it?
Yes, because select doesn't just give us back any old data structure, it always gives us back an array. It's going to give you every match in an array, even if there's only one of them. So if I only want the first match, there's a special one for that. What's that?
Can you use dot find?
Yeah. Dot find works the exact same way, but it's only going to give us the first match that it finds. So now when I do that exact same thing, I just get back the hash. Map is array to array or hash to array. Select is array or hash to array. Find is array or hash to one of whatever is inside that array or hash. Reduce is array or hash to whatever you fucking want, as long as it's one thing, including one array or one hash or whatever. All right, making progress. Okay, so now I can get a player by name. So if we go back over to old num points scored, what do I do here?
All in that method.
Yeah, why not? What do I pass into it?
You can pass in the key of the points.
Oop, not yet.
Oh.
Take a look at what does get player by name take?
Your player by name takes the
The name of the player.
name of the player.
Yeah, that thing that I'm passing into the method, right?
Right.
So actually use parentheses on this. All right, so that gives me the matching player. And what do I want from them?
The points, number of points scored.
That's what I called it, right? Points. Yep. Hot damn. So, moment of truth. We're still green. Same behavior, different implementation. And look at that beaut. One line. One very readable line also. Here's my favorite part of this shit. So if we did that for num points scored, what about shoe size?
Just
And get player.
change points to shoe.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it still green? Whoop, 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 whoop. All right, so we got an error. Undefined, oh, I know what it is.
It's supposed to be a symbol.
Or method player name. What's that mean?
Oh.
Oh, yeah, it wasn't defined in that method.
Okay. What is it?
Ah, it's being fed player n instead of player
There
name.
we go. Let's get rid of those parens. All right, are we still green? We're still green. Now we're getting to like some serious reusable logic. So this was our original num points scored. This is our refactored num points scored. We got a hard problem, so we made the problem easier and solved that problem. That is programming in a nutshell.
Hey, Kyle, I have a question.
Yeah.
Does the order of these methods impact the results? So if you were to put shoe size, say write that method first, and then get players by name, will that affect anything?
Let's see. If I put these before these like get players and get player names, still work? Yeah, order doesn't matter.
Cool.
That does come up in other languages, though, doesn't it? That's like function prototyping.
Ah, like buy me a drink first. So, yeah, there are languages where that matters. Not many of them, though. So the difference in like gerbil script. So in JavaScript, I can do something like this. Like that function can be there or it can be there, doesn't matter. But if I wrote that as something like that, order very much matters. That this won't work, that will. So like the real answer to that is that like order matters in functional languages and it doesn't matter in object-oriented languages.
So Kyle, Brian's original code was like 7 lines, and we refactored it to have multiple methods that ended up being like 15 lines, but then it was useful because you used it in multiple places. Is there a balancing act where like if you know this method is only going to be used once, it's fine to make it what it is as opposed to breaking it onto multiple methods? Or is it like generally better to, I don't know how to say it, do what we did, break it out?
That's a great question. So lines of code don't matter. Like that's thing number one. And that's a thing that a lot of even very experienced developers are like not super sharp on. Think about like when we took this and jammed it all into one line, it made it harder to read. 2 less lines though. So what we really care about is readability. More than anything, even more than reusability, we care about readability. So being able to do something like get player by name, player name, points. That is very elegant. So even if this was the only method in the entire thing, being able to put these labels, all right, get player by name. That's what this does. You can take my word for it, or this is how that happens. That's a really beautiful separation of those things. And so you can think of like your variable names and your method names as like labels for the thing that you're trying to do. So I'm putting a label on this and this is how it gets done. Or we could, the other way we could do this is, all right, well, if that's get player by name, then I could just copy this method body in here and say, oops, that, and then instead of get players, I could take all this stuff that we did here and I could inline that and I could say something like all players equals this. And then we'll make that all players. All right, so we've inlined all the logic there. I've been doing this a long time. I think that's pretty hard to read. There's just a lot happening here. That's something I got to sit down and go, whoa, 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 whoa. Let me make sure I understand this. Versus this, I don't have to sit down and understand that. I'll just believe that it works, especially if I have tests backing that up. The other thing that I'll see a lot, especially with students, is something like that. If you find yourself tempted to do something like that, chances are you're going to be better off just breaking those into separate methods.
Okay. So would a fair summary of that be when you've got a moderate to large size problem, break it into smaller problems and create clear solutions to each step?
I think you're ready to graduate.
I don't think so.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Okay.
And if you want to read more about that process, there's a really cool book called How to Solve It by Georg Polya. And so when we get into like whiteboarding and like all of those exercises that Jesse does in the morning sessions, those are all based off of Polya's method, which a lot of that is about problem decomposition.
What was that author?
Georg Polya. It looks like George without the E at the end. And then Polya is Polya.
That is a tricky name.
That is.
Indeed. Cool. That's those Germans. Cool. So we're at time. I'll do one more question if you want.
Would you be willing to post the 4 methods that we worked on, like in the Slack?
Oh, sure. You talked me into it.
Thank you.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Can I squeeze one more question in there? I'm thinking about the bachelor problem that some of us have been working on, and thinking towards our assessments and eventual code challenge. So it's a theme that we should be getting away from dot each and using some different enumerators.
Correct.
I assume it'd be enumerables. I assume that you would say it's worth our time to be making like refactoring this stuff to not be dot eaches to prepare us for future stuff.
Correct. So each does have a place. Each is for side effects. So for example, like for you, I think the only side effecty thing that you guys know how to do right now is puts. If I wanted to put something to the screen a bunch of times, that's what each is for. That's not a map because it's not a transformation. It's not a reduce because it's not an accumulation. It's not a select because you're not reducing the size, like changing the size of the output at all. It's not a find because you're not trying to locate something. You're just trying to do something a bunch of times. That's an each. So it's not something you need to strike from your vocabulary, but every time you use an each, pause for 10 seconds and think if you're doing some kind of data transformation or trying to find something, you probably have a more specific enumerable you can use. Enumerable method, I guess would be a more correct way to say that. Cool. What else? All right, I said I'd post these in Slack. Those are our new friends. I'm going to throw some triple ticks around this. There you go. Awesome. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. If you're confused about what you should be doing at any point, standards, the basic like ifs and loops and that kind of stuff, then enumerables, and then classes and objects. Got tons of material on that stuff, and I hope it serves you well. Bye.
Thanks, Kyle.